Speedo. SCTV is on here. I still gotta mount this thing. That's really a drag that you can't read it. Oh well. 2, 3, 4. Doo doop boop ba 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 ba. Doo doop 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 doop. Doo. What ba 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 ba. It's Wednesday. Hi everybody. Oh, what's this backing board say? It says picks of the week. Ba ba ba. Sometimes I can't hear myself very well. Not a lot of people know this about me, but I had a real mumbling problem growing up because I was often afraid I would get hit. But then I started working at Carl's Jr. in the drive-thru, and well, can I take your order? Yes. First up. I don't know. I'm super tired, even though I didn't. It's not like I ran a marathon today. I did coach youth soccer, so there's that. First up, Defenders #1. Yeah! So this is volume 6 of the Defenders. It was one of my favorite titles. I realized today there's a couple Defenders series from the early aughts that I don't have. I think there's one from the late 90s that I also don't have. But in fairness, I've been trying to buy them in order, or at least I want to finish the first series before I try to read the second one, which I think is only like 6 issues. Most of them, like a lot of comics these days, don't last more than a few issues. Like I can't think of a single title that, for example, that Marvel publishes. Like Savage Dragon was one of the first comics released on Image Comics back in 92, I guess it was. Maybe 93 that one came out. It was by Eric Larson, and he still is doing it, and he has the original numbering. It's only like in the 200s, which only I say, but if he were doing it monthly from that point, it would be a lot higher, I think. Or maybe not. I don't think it's been monthly this whole time, though. I don't see how it possibly could be, because he does everything himself. Even if part of it is now a stroke book. But I digress. This new Defender series is written by Al Ewing and drawn by Javier Rodriguez, whose name I definitely know and whose art I recognize. He might have done that Doctor Strange and the Sorcerers Supreme series, plural sorcerers, from like 2017 or so, something like that. But yeah, I'm super stoked for this. So you have the original members, the Silver Surfer and Doctor Strange, but then you also have the Phantom. I can't remember his name now. In fact, I can't remember any of their names. But that might be. Is that Betty Ross? Gosh, see what I'm just a little loopy today. But regardless, it's written by Al Ewing, and Al Ewing, who has been killing it at Marvel ever since he started there, and whose biggest book, The Immortal Hulk, is wrapping up here in September, maybe October. It's really a bummer. They're pushing the final issue an extra month to really drag it out. But I mean, he's become rather indispensable to Marvel at this point. And this Defenders series feels like it might be them throwing him a bit of a bone. I mean, I hope it lasts for a while, but like I say, no comics last anymore. Even your heavy hitters at Marvel, like your Fantastic Four and your X-Men and etc., your Spider-Man, they've never not had a title. But they start the numbering over all the time, and then sometimes they'll go back to the original legacy numbering if they hit a milestone. Like I think who's hitting like an 800? See, that's the thing; it's hard to keep track anymore. Oh, Runaways, which is not a pick of the week, but the Runaways issue of the Runaways number 38 came out this week, right? Or 34? It's in the 30s. And it is 38, but it's technically issue like 200 or something like that, because they're counting the original, the first 3 or 4 series. And it's like, just start it from the beginning. The reason they don't do that is because, and this is mostly speculation, but it's an educated guess. Psychologically, when people see new readers see a high number, they're like, well, I don't want to have to read 295 issues, before, because God forbid you would have to read more comics. But if they come in at number one, then it's like, oh, okay, well, and I get it, but it's not the same as when I was a kid. So that's my main problem with it. Also, speaking of being a kid, again, Hardware number one came out this week, part of the Milestone Returns DC event. This is another. They're bringing back all the Milestone books, and again, I hope they last. But DC, even more than Marvel, it seems like, will bail on stuff like this all the time these days. Like imprints. I mean, Milestone, the original Milestone imprint didn't last but a few years. Right? I mean, am I interested in Flag probably after the first year or two? Probably the first year. But I was also a teenager, so what do you want? But I'm particularly excited for this because I just reread the first 8 issues of Hardware a few months ago, and so I remember pretty clearly, I'm excited to see what they do with the character now. Even though I haven't read more than the first 8 issues, I have a feeling they're not going to go that in depth, but just having, like I said, shut up. And also this week, I'm very excited from the world of Black Hammer, The Unbelievable Unteens by Jeff Lemire and Tyler Crook. I'm excited for this just because it's more Black Hammer stuff, and I really am into the Black Hammer universe. But what's throwing me for a bit of a loop in it, I was like, I don't know how excited. I mean, I'm excited, but maybe I should be more excited. The Black Hammer universe, as I've said a million times, is Jeff Lemire's version of the DC universe. So he's just kind of doing a bunch of stories, or at least that's how it started. I think at this point, it still has that aspect to it, but it's definitely taken on a life of its own. And like this current the Black Hammer Return series, he's in uncharted waters. And so I'm thinking, since The Unbelievable Unteens, that sounds like the Uncanny X-Men. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just have never. Maybe this is going to be a Teen Titans or some other sort of DC analog that I just am not thinking of because I'm not as DC heavy. Or maybe he's going to start bringing in some Marvel stuff to play with. And why not, right? I mean, the whole kind of point of these guys doing it, and again, the other examples I've mentioned, like Kurt Busiek's Astro City or Alan Moore's Supreme or Mark Waid's Irredeemable, is to play with the neighbor kids' toys in your own sandbox. And there's nothing Jeff Lemire's already taken all these toys out of DC's toy box, so why not take a few out of Marvel's and see what happens there? So, being that I'm much more into the Marvel universe, I'm very excited for this. So this is good. A good group for picks of the week. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. And now we'll get to so this week was kind of a lighter week for me, and I was relieved for a change. This is a pattern for me just as a comic book collector, and I don't know how this stacks up against other comic book nerds, but I get to a point. I think this is pretty relatable though for most collectors anyway. Is I get to a point where the buying of comics becomes so automatic that I am buying books that I don't really want that badly. And I think this last week, I had like my birthday weekend a week ago, and so that was just wall-to-wall reading, and then I've still read a bunch. Like yesterday I had a good chunk of time to get some reading in, and I realized I'm like, because I'm still have like 3 books from last week that I haven't finished reading yet, and I realized I'm like, it's because there's too many for one thing, and not that many. There's a bunch of them that aren't that good, or at the very least a bunch of them that I could read on my tablet at some later date, or like from a library book, and I don't need to own right now. The big Marvel titles like those I can't do without, with the exception of like Spider-Man. I don't buy any of those, but I buy all the like Avengers and the X-Men and FF and Iron Man and Thor and like all the big names. And like there's going to be a new Black Panther series that John Ridley's writing, and I've been really into his stuff more lately. So I'm looking forward to that. And Al Ewing is taking over Venom, and Donny Cates is taking over the Hulk. They're doing a little switcheroo there. And, I started buying Daredevil again. So it's like, that's my stuff. The major continuity 616 Marvel Universe, those are my stories. In like a devout housewife with her soap operas. What am I, from the 50s? Look at that, I might be. I can't do without my stories. And I have not missed an issue of any of those books. Jeez. 20 years maybe? No, probably not quite that many, but it's certainly. But I started working at San Diego Comics in 2005, and that was when it really ramped up. So there was no reason for me not to start buying Avengers and not to start reading all these other superhero books that I had kind of been shying away from for a few years because I had quit superhero comics altogether in the late 90s, mid 90s. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm getting off track. What? I am going to not try to go for an hour this time. So anyway, what happens though is, I will start buying, like I do like other stuff. And so I've been buying a lot of indie stuff, and I don't have any regrets about that, but I'm definitely taking a more jaundiced eye and dropping a few books that my collector impulse is telling me not to, but that the rest of me is like, dude, I'm doing better at not blowing money. Like, comics remains my major vice. And if I can ratchet that down a hair or two, I can get a car that much quicker, I think. So I'm going to have to start cutting stuff. Having said that, this is what I read for last week, and you'll see what I mean. So first up was Snelson #1, Comedy is Dying. This was fine. You got me on a Peter Bag cover, but I'm probably not going to get the rest of it. The guy who wrote it is not bad, but this little blurb, I pointed this out last week, the first funny book series in 50 plus years to star a stand-up comic. I thought that was tongue-in-cheek because there are two that I can name off the top of my head within the last year. But the editor or whomever wrote the back matter was like, oh, not since The Adventures of Bob Hope, which was a real thing in the 50s. And I was like, oh, honey, no. I don't know if you've read Bleeding Cool lately, but yeah, there was Knock 'Em Dead, and before that there was Dying is Easy, which are both better titles, just title alone. So this is about this guy Snelson was a real edgelord back in the 90s before they called them edgelords. And he has since been canceled, so but now he's on the road with like a trans comedian and another, like a black comedian, I don't know, a rainbow coalition to kind of shore up his own, to sort of rehabilitate his image. And obviously, and then of course he hasn't changed, and then he starts, by the issue's end, he's like, well, I'm going to start taking matters into my own hand. Now, look. It's entirely possible that, unless it was the Watchmen of comic books about stand-up comedians, that the third series about stand-up comedians in a year and a half, I was going to be burnt out on. But I don't know, honestly, because I love stand-up, even though I've been doing it for 8 years. What's today? It'd be 8 years the 27th of August. And I still love it. But yeah, there are definitely aspects of it that I can do without. And I think one of them at this point has become the sort of behind the scenes peek at things. Because it's like, well, now that I'm, not to brag, but now that I've been on the other side now that I've been in the industry at the lowest possible level, but still technically in it, when I read these comics now or go to see movies like The Joker or whatever, I cannot help but just be like, that's not how that goes at all. And so but I think in this particular instance, because I will, Dying is Easy was very much lined up with my own experience, even though it takes place in the 90s when I was not doing stand-up. And Knock 'Em Dead I was very impressed. It wasn't even, Knock 'Em Dead was a good series, and I'm glad I have it, but it wasn't the story I was impressed with as much as how it was told and the way they depicted. And I wish I could remember the creative team on that book, but the way they depicted a stand-up, especially a brand new stand-up, and working on his, and it's like it's hard to explain. You'd have to have read it, I think, to get what I'm saying. But instead of trying to write comedian dialogue, or instead of trying to write the main character jokes, they would use icons, like emojis almost. And so it would just be emoji. It was almost like a rebus. Emoji, and then it would go X because it would bomb. And then the first time it gets to the emoji and it's like, yeah, and then it equals laugh, I was like, oh, that actually is, that is more accurate in the way that, fiction can be more accurate, even if technically it's made up. This honestly feels like it's trying to capitalize on this whole cancel culture bullshit they got going on now, which, I couldn't, I'm not just sick of the phrase cancel culture. I've been sick of hearing the whole PC debate since I'm in high school. For 30 years, people have been talking about, oh, you can't say this anymore. And I go, well, how many fucking years is it going to be before you can or can't? Who gives a crap? Can't say this anymore is a phrase that I've heard once a month since I'm in 8th grade. I get you can't say this anymore. Okay, I don't care one way or the other anymore. I mean, I didn't always feel that way. I used to be very anti-PC because that's what George Carlin told me to do. But I'm at a point now where I'm just sick of it, and I'm not really particularly interested in another fiction. And that's the other thing too. A fictionalized version of an asshole comedian. I can throw a rock in this town and hit 10 guys like that. Throw it hard. I think that really is the other thing. Dying is Easy, the main protagonist, was kind of an asshole, but he was an ex-cop, and he had a very hard-boiled PI thing. So when I was reading it, plus it also took place in the 90s when I was watching a lot of it, but I wasn't doing any of it. So it's easier for me to kind of distance myself from that character enough to like him. With Knock 'Em Dead, the main character was an open micer, which I'm not much more than an overrated open micer myself, even though I have headlined and I am a professional. I have headlined, that's my brag. So that was much closer to my experience, and so I really resonated with that character. A burnout, old, bitter asshole who, I mean, I could drive you to if I had a car, I could drive you to a mic in North Hollywood right now and introduce you to this guy. And you would not thank me for it. First of all, you'd be like, why the fuck did we come all the way up North for this? So I think that might be the biggest part of it, is just that this rings a little, this is my, I brought, when I was a senior in high school, I brought home from the video store Apocalypse Now, and my dad, who had been on a riverboat in the Vietnam War, was like, nah, I don't much care for that movie. And I was a guy, because especially at that time, my big thing was accuracy or authenticity. So I was watching all these Vietnam movies, and I would grill my dad afterwards because I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted them to be accurate. So that was my first question, was like, oh, does it not hold up? And my dad was like, no, it's too real. I was like, oh shit, that's even better. I don't know if you guys knew this. My dad met Dennis Hopper in Vietnam. This is my Apocalypse Now. This is a story about a guy who I've had to fucking bring on stage before, and let me tell you, the experience wasn't that pleasant. And to read about it after the fact, not much more pleasant. Speaking of comedians I enjoy working with, I also read Joker, A Puzzle Box. This was pretty fun. I read it. I got another Joker book here that I read this week. And this is by Matthew Rosenberg, who I have not read a whole lot of, because apparently he's writing for DC more these days. So yeah, he writes more of, for one thing, I don't want to say a Cesar Romero Joker, but it's definitely a little more of a lighthearted Joker. not a Killing Joke Joker. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Plus, it also features all of Batman's Rogues Gallery, which I always think is fun. When all the villains get to be, oh, that's right, and oh, I thought this artist was somebody else. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was fun. I think I'll stick with this. I mean, I feel like if this doesn't at least stay at this level, I'm gonna drop it because I'm gonna be a little more. I'm gonna start dropping stuff if I don't like it. Like I was just saying. What do you know? I'm repeating myself. Okay, I'll wrap this up. I also read Not All Robots #1. This was also good. Looking forward to the rest of it. It's Mark Russell who written Second Coming, which I read earlier this year and I didn't really like. He wrote in the back matter here that this story was more about. It's more about. Well, I think the title should have made it obvious, but it's kind of his take on the Me Too movement and what that meant for. Well, I should probably refresh myself as to exactly what he says because I could be trotting on a landmine. Right. Not all robots is set in a future world where robots have all the jobs and all the money and thus are assigned to human families as their means of support. This imbues the robots with a powerful sense of privilege, but also a deep resentment of the humans who are dependent on them. So I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate. I'll put it to you like this. I used to be one of these not all men types. When the Me Too movement started in 2017, happily, and I'm not trying to say I'm a saint here or anything. I'm just trying to say that I've learned from past mistakes in a lot of instances. And so if the Me Too movement had happened, 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier, I would have been like, not me, I didn't do it. But, when the Me Too movement happened, you know what I said? Nothing. I kept my goddamn mouth shut because I had never been sexually assaulted. And so, I did tweet about that because I have been in a way. When I was 19, I worked graveyard at a gas station. And long story short, a guy showed me his dick once. And I'd forgotten about it. That's how little it meant to me. That was how much sort of privilege I was imbued with, was that I saw this guy showed me his dick. He was doing it. He was being sneaky about it too. I was giving him his change for a pack of cigarettes. And I went like, because what the hell else was I gonna do? But when I went like that, and then I looked at his face, and he was doing one of these, and I was like, oh man, I did exactly what he wanted me to do, and I was pissed. But then I forgot about it. I don't know what else to say. It was like, it would pop in the memory, would pop into my mind every now and again. I would kind of go, oh yeah. And so like during the Me Too movement, not the YouTube movement, that's what I'm heading up. But during that, I was like, oh yeah, that did happen to me. And I was like, I can't believe I forget that happened. What a horrible thing to have happen. Not the most horrible thing, obviously, but that was kind of my takeaway from that. That was the sort of lesson learned, was that it didn't scar me. It didn't traumatize me because, for one thing, it didn't happen to me every day like it does for some women, or most, or all. I don't know. I'm taking them at their word, though. And I'm friends with enough women and have worked with enough women to know that catcalling and harassment and even just, smile for me and that sort of thing, it's ubiquitous. I certainly don't ever do it, but I also don't insist that I get recognition for it. Because, so my point is, it didn't happen to me every day. It happened, that was the only time I can really remember. There might have been other instances, though. And most importantly, I think, is that I had been trained I had not been trained to think it was my fault. And if anything, I had been taught that, no, that guy's the weirdo. You're fine. That guy is the weirdo for whipping his dick out. nobody ever would have, if I had told anybody, nobody would have been like, well, what were you asking for? What were you wearing? I mean, I did look really cute, I will say that. But I wasn't showing off any skin. So once I realized that, you know, I was lucky that that didn't do more psychological damage, which, trust me, covered. We don't need any more psychological damage over here. When I realized that that was why, and then that was, in fact, that was when people would say privilege and white privilege and male privilege, it had honestly never really sunk in. I was like, oh, that doesn't sound good, but I'm still not 100% on what you're talking about. Then that memory occurred to me, and I went, oh, that's privilege. It was my privilege to forget about it, and I have it lucky, so I didn't say anything after that. You know what I mean? I wasn't going to get defensive about things I might have said, or, you know, I mean, shit I might have done when I was younger, especially. I don't take it personally now when, like, you know, my women friends are just women on the news, or what am I saying? I don't get defensive when it comes. Not all men. I don't need to fly that flag. So, having said all that, that younger, stupider Jimmy is still very much like, I still think about this sort of thing a lot. And so I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like, I'm not going to say that the writer's intent, I have no window into that. But what I can is, for my own experience, be like, oh, okay, this might help me process some more of this bullshit. Because that notion of having all the jobs and all the money obviously gives you privilege. And as white guys, that's what we have. I don't have any money. Well, I've got a little bit now, I guess. I'm saving up. I have several jobs, but they don't pay that good. But I still, like I say, you know, I don't get sexually harassed on the street all the time, despite my best efforts. I don't get paid less because of my gender. You know, all this other stuff. So I'm thinking about it a lot. But it does, that resentment that he talks about was something that I was very familiar with when I was like college aged, especially. I remember it being a real thing. And really, I mean, I could have told you at the time it was just sexual frustration, if it was anything. But a lot of this, like, well, what about men, and what about her, and male culture should have more significance, like it doesn't, or, you know, all this other bullshit, which I used to genuinely believe. It was all out of a fear of women and a fear of being alone, but I still had all this resentment in me. So it is that dynamic that I think, and also I just honestly like robots. And I feel like this is exactly the sort of story that sci-fi does well, and so far so good. Boy, that was a long way to go for not much. All right, I'll show you. The other Joker thing I read was this Suicide Squad Get Joker. This was fun. This is Azareo and Maliev. And Maliev's still killing it. Azareo, I feel, is, I don't know. 100 Bullets was so good, but even like Moonshine, which I'm still buying, that'll be the next book to go, if it goes though. Oh, he did bring Wild Dog into this. That was another thing that was fun about this, was that he brought in a bunch of, it's like just like the new movie, which I went and saw this week also. You've got Harley Quinn, and then you got Jason Todd, the Red Hood, formerly Robin, the second Robin, and then a bunch of characters that I don't even recognize because they're so D-list. Yeah, except for Wild Dog, I did recognize him. So that's fun, but it's really, at this point, more the marquee talent. And Alex Maliev is one of my favorite artists, and he doesn't do that much, so I think I'm just going to buy the rest of that series just for that. And then this might be the favorite thing I got this week, and I didn't even get it from the comic shop. So I showed you, excuse me, that book last week, Line Shaft, that magazine Line Shaft, and this guy Max Klottfelter had a comic in it called The Elements of Rough, and it's only like 4 or 5 pages from one of these booklets, but these are like mini comics that he's done about his childhood and how much like his parents were real alcoholics. His whole family alcoholics, and his dad hung around a lot of shifty weirdos and characters and stuff. And also, this guy is my age, so all the stuff that he shows depicts himself reading Gru comics and playing Nintendo. I was like, oh, okay, so we're the same kid. So yeah, this was fun. This one is like his young childhood, and then this volume is I think it's his sister's birthday party from when he's in his 20s, and it's apparently going to get worse. So I'm excited. Hope there's a third one soon, because these I think are kind of old at this point. Yeah, these are from 2015. So I mean, I hope it does. Oh, okay, so this is 2015, 2018. So I guess he's about due for the third one. And then also this more sturdy collection, Rooftop Stew, is also really good. His non-biographical comics are very rough. That's why he does that. There's a lot of sick twisted stuff. And this guy I really like because he's definitely read all the same. I mean, he's wearing a Jim Woodring t-shirt in one of these. And I was like, yeah, I mean, not because he was super into Marvel and stuff like I was, but also super into the indie stuff like I was. So his style is very reminiscent of that early 90s Fantagraphics style. Like, he looks like, to me, for my money, he looks the most like J.R. Williams. But a lot of Jim Woodring is in there, a lot of Peter Bagge is in there, Dan Clyde. Anybody who had a comic on Fantagraphics in the 90s, you can find in Max Clodfelter's work now. And that's a great thing, because I love all those comics, and so to get new ones is even better. All right, I think that's it then. That felt like a good. Oh my! Oh, you're right. I was fixed last week. All right, so that's this one. Oh gosh, I was hoping it wouldn't go half an hour. This is your fault.